Go. Find the stones. Bring them to me.
What will you do?
Wait.
Last week, we talked about the ending act of Avengers Endgame and how it can very easily make you think of this movie as the best MCU entry ever made. But in that same video, I also briefly mentioned that this isn't actually objectively speaking the case. I wouldn't rank it as high up as I would, for example, Infinity War. Again, don't get me wrong, I think Endgame is a very nice love letter to the earlier days of the MCU, with an incredible ending. But Infinity War, that's an incredible movie from beginning to end. And when I started wondering why I feel this way, there's a few smaller negative aspects about Endgame that quickly came to mind. The pacing in the first hour, for example, is kinda non-existent because nothing happens. And even though the time travel aspect can be cool, it seems to come a bit out of nowhere. I mean, Tony Stark on one evening just decides to take a look at time travel and then instantly figures it out. Oh, okay. And time travel itself, that's a can of worms that will be very difficult to close. Now, every time something bad happens in these movies, the audience can be like, well, why don't they just go back in time and undo that? Plus, at least for me, this movie kinda took the easy way by having there be multiple different time universes, instead of having time be just one linear thing where the past affects the future. Because the infinite universes thing, it takes away from the stakes in the grand scheme of things, since nothing that happens is now truly definitive or final. Also, you're not supposed to talk crap about Back to the Future.
And your former present becomes the past, which can't now be changed by your new future.
Exactly.
So Back to the Future is a bunch of bullshit?
What the fuck?
But smaller flaws like that, it's all something I can overlook, because at this point I care about these characters so much that I would happily watch them play golf for an hour. However, for me, there is a bigger central problem in this movie that the more I think about, I simply just cannot overlook. A problem of the ThanosRat. And if you have no clue what I'm on about, it's basically a fancy way for me to say that this film has a big villain problem that divides into two different sides. And the plan for today is to take a closer look at those two sides, what they mean, what storytelling issues they create. Plus, maybe at the end we'll also find out how they perhaps could have been fixed. In other words, let's investigate how the greatest strength of Avengers Infinity War became the greatest weakness of Avengers Endgame. Starting out with the rat problem, it essentially is a summarizing term for me to use to say that for the first 2 hours, this movie has no villain. And when I say no villain, I don't mean a bad villain or a weak villain. I mean, for the entirety of the first and second acts of Endgame, there is no villain.
Aside from one exception.
Thor, he's back. That kid on the TV just called me a dickhead again.
Bring me Noob Master.
Yeah, Noob Master 69.
It is alluded to have a villain at the very beginning, but we all know how that turns out. The first thing that very easily happens when you don't have a proper bad guy in your movie is that everything in it becomes excruciatingly slow, which is exactly the issue in the first hour of Endgame after Thanos' beheading. Whereas in Infinity War, the Avengers were instantly forced into action because Thanos was actively pushing the plot, here they just kinda end up hanging out with absolutely nothing to do. And even though you might give the movie a pass because you like these characters so much, that doesn't change the fact. Films where nothing happens are not that great examples of compelling, entertaining filmmaking. They're just kinda boring. And the more times I watch this film, the more evident it gets. But as I'm sure some of you might argue against this, another good way to see if a movie is in desperate need of a villain is when crucial events and plot points of the story happen not because they're organic or deserved, but instead entirely unrandom, which is also very much the case in Endgame, like with Thanos and the stones in the beginning.
Until 2 days ago, on this planet.
Thanos is there.
He used the stones again. Where are the stones?
Gone. Reduced to atoms.
You used them 2 days ago.
He used the stones to destroy the stones.
Since this movie made such a big deal out of Thanos destroying the stones 2 days ago, I initially thought of it as a very exciting mystery. Maybe Thanos for some reason had to do it. Maybe someone else was after the stones and he had to destroy them before that someone could get them. Something. I mean, he didn't destroy them a week ago. He didn't destroy them 5 days ago. He destroyed them specifically 2 days ago. And there has to be a reason for that. But of course, then it turned out that no, there actually is no reason. He destroyed the stones 2 days ago because he just felt like doing it more then than he did 3 days ago. And the movie also needs a way for the Avengers to find him in order to work. If you keep your eyes open, you can find plenty of forced random moments just like this in the first 2 hours of the film. Tony figuring out time travel just like that so that the Avengers can do their time heist. Nebula very arbitrarily connecting to the network of her younger self in the past so that Thanos can find out about the Avengers. The list goes on. But the biggest problematic random moment of all has to be the way Ant-Man is brought back from the quantum realm. I mean, this whole movie is dependent on the narrative event that Ant-Man returns and then brings up the topic of time travel. And in what super organic, super deserving way does the movie create this moment? Yeah, a random rat accidentally pushes the right buttons and this way makes the whole movie possible. I don't care what fancy theories you might invent about this moment. All it is lazy writing that takes the audience out of the experience. But just in case you're still not convinced that this movie is desperately missing a villain, there's also a third issue that appears in the time travel act. The issue of everything being way too easy. If you look past the cool nostalgic feeling, you can quickly notice that there are no real obstacles in this time travel sequence whatsoever. Banner succeeds by just accidentally saying the right thing.
What did he say?
Rhodey and Nebula succeed by just walking through a door. Thor succeeds even though he doesn't even do anything. I get that these are meant as character or exposition moments, but that's no excuse to disregard the challenge altogether. To be fair, there are some obstacles in the concept of time travel itself, like when Cap has to fight his younger self and when Hawkeye and Black Widow have to sacrifice a loved one. But that's not enough. You still need a proper antagonistic force. Raiders of the Lost Ark didn't become one of the greatest treasure hunt movies ever just because Indiana Jones had to overcome traps that belong in treasure hunting. It's because he also had to race against the German army. And in the same way, this time heist sequence would have been so much better with the added challenge and urgency of the Avengers having to race against some real villain to find the stones. But of course, that wouldn't be possible because there is no villain. In the third act, our heroes finally find a villain in the new, younger Thanos of the past. And as I said in my last video, it's a great final. But what I didn't say in my last video is that I genuinely don't like this new, younger Thanos. Like, Thanos in Infinity War is hands down the best villain in the MCU, but this Thanos in Endgame is easily among the very worst. In fact, this younger Thanos is such an incompetent insult to Thanos of Infinity War that from here on out we're going to refer to him as Thonos. My problems with Thonos began right when I first saw him, because his visual appearance was nowhere near as good as with Thanos in Infinity War, which might be because I think they made him more bluish purple here, which gave him a more cartoony appearance. And that really is the perfect metaphor for this character as a whole. Remember how Thanos in Infinity War was meticulously developed as a real person, how he was affected by the destruction of his home planet, how he sacrificed his own beloved daughter to achieve his goal. Well, none of that is present here. Thanos never even mentions his home. He doesn't seem to care enough about his daughter to even notice her. Overall, he doesn't get any development whatsoever. Maybe the filmmakers assumed they didn't have to give him development because they already did so with Thanos, but that's not how that works. Essentially, with one quick swing of an axe, all the things that made Thanos who he is were gone.
Titan was like most planets. Too many mouths, not enough to go around. And when we faced extinction...
What did you do?
I went for the head.
Also, remember how Thanos was such an entertaining villain because he was as active as any villain can be. He was always pursuing a goal, he was always actively doing something. Basically, he was like Trevor Phillips in his first mission in GTA 5, in that he decides to solve all his life problems in one go.
Oh, where are you guys going, huh?
You
a lot today. It was time to put my affairs in order.
Well, Thonos isn't like that. Thonos is the kind of guy who likes to just sit back and let other people do the work. Instead of going for the stones in the past, he just lets the Avengers gather them and use them, and later loses because of it. Instead of looking for the stones in the rubble himself, he just,
Wait.
And let's not forget that since Thonos didn't actually cause any of the events of Infinity War to happen, he has no connection to any of it whatsoever, which takes away from the emotional impact.
You took everything from me.
I don't even know who you are.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No.
I don't even know who you are.
But the single biggest problem of Thanos has to be the fact that the motivations driving him are non-existent. Thanos in Infinity War was such a great villain because he didn't see himself as the villain. He genuinely thought he was doing good. His whole reason for existing was to bring balance to life in order to save it. But with Thanos, this motivation of balance is barely even mentioned. He doesn't seem to want the stones because he believes he's doing good. He seems to want them just because he's a ruthless bad guy, and that's what ruthless bad guys do. Thanos did bad things because he was motivated enough to think of himself as destiny. Thanos does bad things because he sees that his future self already did them, and so now he thinks that doing them is his destiny.
Destiny arrives all the same. And now it's here. Or should I say, I am. I found them all. I won.
This is your future.
It's my destiny.
But for the sake of argument, let's say that Thanos actually does have the same motivation as Thanos. Maybe he does, maybe I just didn't see it. Even if that is the case, it still doesn't work, because his plans and actions are in direct logical conflict with that motivation. Just listen to what he aims to do at the end.
I know what I must do. I will shred this universe down to its last atom. And then, with the stones you've collected for me, create a new one, teeming with life.
I want you to really think about what you just heard. The motivation of the real Thanos is to destroy half of life in order to prevent all life from being destroyed from lack of resources. That is the only reason why Thanos is after the stones. But here, Thanos says that he wants to use the stones to destroy all life and build it again. As in, he wants to use the stones to do the exact thing that the whole purpose of the stones was to prevent from happening in the first place. And it's like, what? With this mindset, you might as well just let the Avengers bring everybody back and wait for life to be destroyed from lack of resources and then create new life. Like, none of this makes any sense. And I guess that in of itself does make sense, because no matter from what angle you try to look at things, Thanos isn't Thanos. He's just a two-dimensional dumb version of him. Initially, I thought that all the antagonist problems could be fixed by simply replacing Thanos with another villain. But to be honest, that wouldn't really work either. The Infinity Saga is a story of the Avengers versus Thanos. Building up one villain and then at the end suddenly switching them to some entirely other villain, for some reason I don't think that's too great of an idea. But the thing that Endgame should have done is add a smaller secondary villain to push the plot when Thanos or Thonos or anyone else isn't doing it, just like Zemo did in Civil War.
And the Avengers, they went home. I knew I couldn't kill them. More powerful men than me have tried. But if I could get them to kill each other...
I'm not saying the new villain should be Zemo or even anyone human, but I am saying it should be some third-party bad guy with his own goals that would fix the problem of having a long section with no villain whatsoever. Firstly, now things wouldn't be so excruciatingly slow and eventless, because we actually have a villain out there doing things and causing things to happen. Secondly, it would also fix the forced randomness of the narrative plot points. Now, Thanos doesn't destroy the stones just because he feels like it, but because maybe the new villain heard about about the stones after the snap and comes to steal them in order to destroy all life, for which he would have some real proper reason. Now Ant-Man isn't brought back by a random rat, but instead by the new villain who after losing the stones studied up on the Avengers and realized that Ant-Man is the key for time travel, and so on. Thirdly, what also would be fixed is the general easiness of the time travel section. Now, instead of the Avengers getting the stones without any real urgency or challenge, they have to race against the new villain to get them, because the villain uses the time machine they built to go into the past to find the stones for himself, like always would have been his plan. Now there's a real actual antagonist to fight and struggle against. Now there's real obstacles and challenge. All in all, now the first two acts of this movie could be a lot stronger. If you personally disagree, fine, but let me ask you this. Do you genuinely believe that Civil War would have been a stronger movie if instead of Zemo deliberately pitting the Avengers against each other, Tony Stark just randomly found an old video showing Bucky killing his parents and then because of that went after him? Maybe it could be, but I don't think so. As for the whole Thanos problem, that's a bit trickier. One way to fix it could have been to keep the Infinity War Thanos alive and then ultimately have him take over Thanos' army in the third act. But then again, it's hard to see the Avengers keeping him as a prisoner for 5 years. Maybe so. Maybe all you really have to do is just write the younger Thanos to be the real actual Thanos, instead of this nonsensical imposter. That's an option. You know, you have the new villain serve as the antagonist for the first 2 hours of the film, but then he maybe ultimately fails to get the stones in the past, and that's why he goes to the younger Thanos and manipulates him into attacking the Avengers in the present, instead of that happening all thanks to this random stuff. And then at the end, maybe the younger Thanos ultimately kills him off and becomes the real villain for the third act. Maybe, I don't really know. Maybe you fellas and fellarettes can tell me your ideas. But whatever solution you ultimately choose, the Thanos that we fight at the end has to be the real Thanos. Please.